Right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Laura Often. I am the current chair of Division 4, and we are hosting, as you know, a presentation on understanding overrides, the processes and the impacts, and how to best get one passed for your town. Um, an overall override strategy. I am very pleased to welcome Brian Regan and Superintendent of Hudson Schools and Dan Gale, the Director of Finance and Operations, to present some lessons learned that they have experienced and strategies and all sorts of great content. Before we get started, just some housekeeping. This is being recorded. There will be an opportunity to download the presentation at the end. Dan has added a QR code at the end, so all of the resources will be available to you. And I think, and Dan, you may have wanted this as well, if maybe while we're getting started, if they want to put in the chat, if your town is going for an override right now, has in the past, or you think may in the future, maybe just throw that in and let us know. And then I am going to turn this right on over to Dan and Brian and get us started. So thanks everybody for your attendance. Glad to have you here.
Sorry, I was rearranging my screen. Can you guys see the slides?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep. They're
Yep.
perfect.
Good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. We gave part of this presentation is from a presentation we gave for MASC in November, and we added some slides and also going to try to give you a lot of information about other overrides from around the state and encourage you to check out those as well. So today's objectives, we want to share information about Hudson's process, including our strategies that got us a successful vote, and we'll also try to share other strategies that have worked in other towns. And we are open to questions. Like Laura said a minute ago, if you can put in the chat if you're currently going for an override and how much, and if it did have a vote, you can let us know if it passed or when that's happening. And also in the chat, feel free to ask any questions as we go along. We'll try to monitor the chat and answer questions either as we're going or at the end. This is just a slide trying to give an overview of things to think about when you're going for an override. Um, So anticipate the need as early as you can with multi-year projections if possible. So um, I used to work in Grafton and now in Hudson, and in those districts we did multi-year projections, so we could see, okay, 2 years from now we're going to need an override. Let's start planning now. Um, so um, anticipate your needs. Sometimes there are unforeseen circumstances. Um, I know I've heard of some other overrides, like Acton Boxborough had a massive insurance increase, or um, I know as part of our override, we were thinking we needed an override, but our override requests grew because we had a 50% increase in our transportation contract. So you might even know that you need an override, but by the time you get there, there might be other things that happen that increase that amount. So just try to plan that ahead because you want to get ahead of the game. And we'll talk about our timeline in a couple slides. So start talking internally with the school and the school committee about your options, how much is needed. Um, for the superintendent and finance director, some of our responsibilities is just to have clear factual data on the budget needs and why the override is needed, and estimate reductions. For your presentations, we'll probably want to mention what will happen if the override doesn't pass. So be prepared to tell your story. You want to talk to the town or the city about, do they want something? So that's a big decision when you're going for an override. Does the town want to also ask for some things for their departments? Um, is there capital needs? Um, things like that. So ideally, you want to get the town manager on board, and as well as the select board or town. Not I didn't mean to say town council, but town the city council. Um, get them on board. Be aware of any large capital projects that are coming up. So in Hudson, we had a DPW building that was just built the year before. Like, so that debt exclusion of like 23 million had just hit. So that's going to affect the voters wanting to raise their taxes again. So just be aware of that. Um, you have to decide if you want to do a 1 year override or multi-year. I think ideally, 3 to 5 years override, enough money to get you through. So you don't want to have to be going on for an override every year. Um, and yeah, definitely encourage a parent group to form. I think as I'll show examples of other overrides that have passed, and they've always had a good website that that's made by a parent group, like I think I think Grafton had Yes for Grafton. There's a I think there was a Yes for Melrose. There's always a site like that that's going to share information to the public. There's a DOR tax impact calculator. Some people have actually coded that into their website so people can try to see their exact impact, but people can go to the DOR site to plug in their town, how much the override is, and see how much it's going to affect their taxes. So be prepared to give presentations to the public. And I suggest Googling other towns like I've been doing for the last couple of weeks to prepare for this presentation, but see how they're wording things, see how they're approaching things. Are they doing tiered override? Are they including the town? Um, and how they're wording things, how they're displaying what the cuts will be if the override fails. All those things are important. So now we'll get into more Hudson specific slides, and then at the end I'll have more slides on other overrides that have recently been attempted. So Hudson, population of 20,000, suburban, mostly residential town, 2,300 students in 5 schools. Um, this is our history, 1992, a loss, 1993 win, 1996 loss. So in 2026, it had been 30 years since we had tried one. You might hear, it'll never happen in this town. I think I've heard that in Grafton before. I've heard it in Hudson. You may have heard it, but I think it's just important to get the message out. Why is it needed? Um, and a lot of it rests on your ability to sell the need. And Brian can talk a little bit about a few slides here.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Masbo for inviting Dan and I to talk to you guys this afternoon. So, if you asked me a year and a half ago if I'd be on this call, I'd say absolutely no. I know nothing about overrides, but having gone through the process, you become an expert pretty quickly. We were lucky in Hudson to have a finance director like Dan who was really tuned into this process and in many ways more aware of sort of the ins and outs of it than folks on the town side. So the school department really was able to take the lead. Dan, can you go to the next slide for me? So whoop, nope, one too far. There we go.
Right.
So one of the things that we did, and the first I just want to say, like, timeline is sort of unique to your community. We've been talking about the need for a couple of fiscal years prior to FY26. So I think for us, it felt like, when are we going to get started? When are we going to get started? We don't want to start too late. The reality is some override campaigns begin just months before or weeks before the actual vote. For us, the true public kickoff didn't happen until the February timeframe, and our vote was in May. But we started the planning as early as June the year before. with having tri-board meetings where a town in Hudson, so we have a finance committee and a select board. Those two boards, along with the school committee, had multiple meetings that we actually led because the other two boards were just sort of along for the ride at first, but we were directing the conversation. And we pulled them in June, the full year before the vote. We pulled them back together in September. And then we were having regular touch points with them all through the fall so that when we were ready to sort of kick things off in January or February, um, all the boards in town knew what was going on. So that communication is really, really key. And to Dan's point earlier about a parent group, we had one stand up very quickly. You do need to be careful that you're not facilitating it and organizing it. So we made the space for them to come together and sort of organize, but all we did was open the meeting and say, have at it. And then the parents took it from there. You just got to be careful that we're not organizing a ballot committee. But they formed and they were super successful and really well organized. You'll find, I'm sure, in your communities, you've got people that are experts in all sorts of things from PR to web design to um, even from the finance realm. So we had all of those aspects going for us. So one of the things that we found, looking at this slide is, what should we not do? And MASC was actually helpful by coming into our school committee meeting and talking a little bit about this. But our staff, like many of your staffs, I'm sure, were very interested in helping to support the override. So we had to, be careful with our union to help navigate them through this process so they didn't do the wrong thing. They were campaigning, they were holding signs, they were attending all of our events, but they were all outside work hours. In the 6 weeks or so before the vote, they would show up to school before contractual hours at all 5 of our buildings, and they would stand just off school property on a public street, and they would hold signs as parents were arriving. But they were careful that once the contractual day started, that they were back in the buildings working, so nobody could accuse them of using work time to promote the override. But they were very active around that, and they were happy to know, because this is allowable, that they could go to all of the events that were being held in support of the override, and they did. So getting your union on board is huge, and the MTA, which I learned through this process, has a really strong arm specific to supporting overrides, and they will put all their efforts into your community for you with your union. So, like, for example, the MTA for us paid for all the yard signs that were around town. I didn't realize they could do this, but they were able to. So they worked with our community group, which was called Together for Hudson. They provided the few $1,000s that they needed for those signs. So getting your unions on board is really critical. Obviously, the second bullet probably goes without speaking, but you just got to be careful about using any district resources around this. This was less of a concern when we were going through it than I thought it would be. It was a lot easier to avoid. And there were multiple occasions where we reached out to legal counsel, our school committee's legal counsel, and just asked a question here or there to make sure that we weren't crossing a line. Go ahead, next slide, Dan.
And Brian, we had a question in the chat about
Oh,
if a PTO meets in the school library, can they discuss the override? And I think one of the things we had talked about is like if a space is used at the school for a pro override, we have to also allow like a no override to use the space.
right. And that was actually one of the questions. So that's a good question. I think to the first point, yes, the PTO can discuss that as they're a separate entity, even though they're using our building, that's fine. But we did check in with our attorney about letting the Together for Hudson group use school facilities for meetings and events. And his advice to us was, just be careful, because if you say yes, which we're allowed to do, if an anti-override group forms, which happens in a lot of communities, you would then have to allow the schools to be used for them as well. We were fortunate; we did not have an anti-override group form. So, but at the same time, our local group, our parent group, didn't tend to utilize buildings very often. I think they were careful to stay away from that just in case.
And in terms of, I don't think we have a slide of what you can do, but like we can be part of the parent group and participate off hours, like on the weekends, holding signs. We can, um, we're just not supposed to do it during our work hour, right? Is that right, Brian?
Yep, that's correct.
Um,
Right. So our timeline, as I said, was fairly once, well, from the public side of things, it was fairly condensed, but I talked to you about having tri-board meetings. You can see in the first few bullets there. We invited MASC in the fall. Our committee, we had an initial volunteer meeting in November. And then we worked with the town's select board to make sure that we had the override added to the warrant. So make sure you're checking. Every town has it, and city has its different bylaws around when, if you have a town meeting and you have a warrant, depending on the process that you follow, but to make sure you don't miss that deadline to get something added to a warrant if it needs to be voted. And around that same time, this was again all before sort of like the massive public kickoff. We worked with the town to publish a Prop 2.5 Q&A that we published. And then February, March, we did the major kickoff. We had a big event at a local, it's a private function hall right in town that they rented, our ballot committee rented. We invited public officials, select board, finance committee. We also invited our state reps and state senator. We had speakers get up and sort of frame the story, which I'll talk about in a moment. We had a panel that included parents, school administrators, local business folks to talk about the impact of poorly funded schools on a community in general. We had that moderated, and that was the big night where we handed out yard signs. This was really well attended. I don't know, Dan, maybe over 1,000 people there in our little town of 20,000. But really well done, and a lot of students there as well. And then we did a whole series of presentations. It was sort of our traveling road show that we did from February to April. Dan and I and our school committee chair, presentations to the school committee. Every single meeting, we talked about the override and the budget, in addition to any budget subcommittee meetings. But then we were frequent visitors to select board, the finance committee. We went to any community event we could go to. We have a downtown business district that has regular meetings. We attended that and spoke. We have 4 or 5 over 55 communities in Hudson. We worked with one of the leaders from one of those communities who actually brought them all together in one of their large meeting rooms in one of the communities, and we did a presentation there, which was, I think, pretty well attended too. There were probably close to 100 people at that. To get some information, and also, met with groups like Rotary Club. And then we had our town meeting on May 5th. We were there with a very succinct handout. We had QR codes that we posted around the gym. They actually moved the town meeting to the gym because we knew there was going to be a large number of people there because of the override. The QR code idea was sort of last minute, but it was actually, I think, well received because we knew we had a week between town meeting and the election, and we had to get a vote of yes in both. We felt pretty good about town meeting because it's easy for people to raise their hand and vote yes for override, knowing that they're going to go to the ballot the next week and they can vote no in private. But we thought within that week, if we found a mechanism to let taxpayers ask any sort of burning questions before they went to the polls. So we posted these QR codes that brought them to a form where they could ask a question that we would then respond to within the week. We didn't get that many, but we got a little more than a handful, and we were able to respond to those people. But I think it led to sort of this idea of transparency, and that we wanted to, make sure they had all the information they needed before they went into the ballot box and ballot booth rather, and voted the following week. And so on May 12th, they went in, and the override passed by a very narrow margin. It was like 2283 to 2145 or something, 2147. So it was close. But a win is a win.
I'll note on the QR codes, I got one of those free websites for QR codes, and it expired after like 30 days. Luckily, that was after the vote. But if you're starting early, get an override that doesn't QR code that doesn't expire.
Go to the next slide, Dan. So I'll just talk real quick about a message that we learned from other communities, and MASC was good about explaining this too. They kept saying, share the story, the story, the story, the story. And so the next few slides that you'll see are visuals that were a staple in almost every one of our visual presentations. So the first one here were these 6 drivers that were creating the perfect storm for us needing the first override in 30 years. So we didn't change this message. We wanted to keep sort of hammering this home, that we were expending all of our school choice funds. And Hudson has a pretty healthy school choice revenue every year. We have a great ratio of in to out around school choice. So it brings us in maybe 1.3 to $1.5 million a year. And that sort of became um, our reserve fund, if you will, to help close gaps, but it wasn't sustainable. So we knew that we were going to use all those funds up for the first time ever. We lost ESSER funds, which you've all experienced. Dan mentioned our transportation costs going up by 51%, which is totally unusual. We had an unusual increase that year in out of district tuitions. And then our charter school issue in Hudson just continues to be a problem every year. But we had a 17% increase for fiscal 26. So this slide with these, you can probably do one that looks a lot fancier than this, but having these 6 columns, colored columns, it became something people were familiar with, and it was the story in a nutshell. It's these things that are driving us to this need for the override. Next slide,
And
Dan.
I'll add like Brian said, if you can figure this out and prepare this in advance, something that's going to be sustainable throughout the whole campaign, you can just continuously have it on the same slide on your presentations. I think it builds trust as if you're not like kind of changing your message a lot.
Yeah, we were talking about those 6 items as far back to the first tri-board meeting, the June, the year before. So that didn't change. Here's another image that we used a lot. Like you've seen this image on your left with the, years ago where everybody had the same size box. And if that box didn't allow you to see over the fence, then you just missed the game, right? So that now modern day education calls on us to do the right thing and make sure that kids have the supports that they need so that everybody has equal access. And so, folks that are out there voting, if they're retired and their kids haven't been in, they haven't had children in school in 40 or 50 years, it's hard for them to sort of wrap their heads around, why are you telling me that it's costing us more and more and more and more? And in our town in particular, we had seen a significant decrease in enrollment over the last decade. So this thinking, if you're telling me you have X number of whatever it was, 19% enrollment drop, why is it costing you more and more every year? So trying to paint this picture for them that how education has changed. And on the right is our high needs percentage trajectory over the past 10 years. So you can see like we're in line with the state, but it's a pretty steep incline of students that are considered high needs in Hudson over time. And this is being seen in communities across the state. But again, this is just an example of a slide that we used almost every time we presented. And people, we're always referring to that slide with the kids looking at the baseball game over the fence. So they understood the difference between, some of them anyway, years ago versus today. Can go to the next slide, Dan. And here again, just along the story, very simple, showing folks our enrollment. We were projecting ahead to 2032 just to be transparent that we're not going to see an increase. We're going to see a steady to a very slight decrease over time, but that we expect the cost will continue to rise. And then on the left, we wanted to show folks that we had been, even though they feel like we haven't been, we have been addressing staffing by reducing it over time as enrollment has gone down. And I should say to also help the town stomach the idea of an override, we approached the budget last year by saying we're going to first make sure we tighten our belts before we ask you for additional funds. We're going to make sure that if we have anything we don't need, we will cut it. And that ended up being 12 FTE, including the assistant superintendent position that we eliminated in the budget before we came up with the final number. And I do think that went well with the community. I think they felt like, okay, they took a deep look at their overall operation and decided we can cut these positions. Fortunately, most of them were through retirements. I think that bought us some goodwill with the community. And that Dan can explain a little bit here in these numbers.
Great. Yes, thanks. So we did our multi-year projections, and we just for FY26 we had a $4.4 million need, a projected need, and then, like Brian said, we reduced 1.1 million, so that we were only asking for 3.3 million. And then the town, this is rare, so don't expect this to happen, but the town suddenly had a spike in new growth from a utility project in town. So they were able to give us, I think it was around 1.5 million or something of new growth money. So we had ended up still asking for 3.3, but then we were in, so it was only going to be like a 1 year override, but then we were able to spread it into a 3 year override, which is ideally what I would recommend 3 plus years. You're trying to get enough money so you don't have to go for another override for 3 plus years. Um, I believe most towns that are kind of in that are continuously doing overrides are trying to be 5 plus years between overrides. Um, so yeah, and we made sure people knew like our estimates of staffing reductions if the override failed. Um, and then we had this table here just to show estimated tax impacts. So you can get this, like I said, on the Department of Revenue tax impact calculator. If you Google tax impact calculator, you'll be able to estimate. So you can put in the amount of the override, um, and this was our phased in approach. So instead of doing 480 in the first year, we were able to only do 287 the first year, then additional 100, then additional 64. So eventually, um, the override was a lower amount for the town. Um, this was somewhat unique to Hudson because of that new growth, but just showing the impact if you're going to phase in the override, which means like, let's say you got an override for 5 million and you only used 2.5 million the first year. So if you put in 5 million in the impact calculator, it might say taxes are going to go up by 1,000, but the first year might only go up by $500 because you're only using half, you're only taxing half of the limit that you've created. Um, so talking that through with residents, I think one of the primary things is they want to know how much is my taxes going to go up. Uh, these are some scenarios we ran by the school committee. So at a school committee meeting, we gave these options to the school committee, and the school committee decided which option they wanted to go with. And once they decided, that's what we used in our public messages to the public. But we thought about a lot of things like adding fees. That's always something that can be considered, um, or increasing fees. And the way we looked at it, anytime if we added fees, that would reduce the amount of FTs we had to cut. Um, and all these slides, I'm going to have a QR code. You can get these slides in a couple minutes. This is just information on the Division of Local Services. If you Google override and underride votes, you'll get this link that's right here. And if you download it to Excel, you can sort it. This is what I've done in the past. You can look at what campaigns have won recently, and maybe search their website to see how they worded things, how they went around. This is an example from Stoneham. This is the information you get on that website. You can see every override back to 1990. What was the amount they asked for? What did they win? Did they lose? This is an example of Stoneham, who just passed an override uh, in December. So this is one of the most recent ones that passed. Um, you'll see that they tried a tiered option. So this is something there's a lot of different options how you can go about an override. So they presented to the public, we need 9,300 just to kind of get by. And that might include reductions, but 12.5 is what they really needed to succeed and have multiple years of sustainability. So they gave on the ballot, um, people could choose either option, and whichever one, if the 12.5 got over 50% of the votes, then that would be the one that passed. If which in this case it didn't, you can see it failed by only about 43 votes. So they almost got the 12.5. They were a couple people away from getting that. So, but they did pass. You'll see the yes votes are 4,000, no votes 3,000 for the 9,300. They were at a very involved city town select board. So they actually created an override study committee. And so it is ideal if you can get the town and select board and people involved in kind of advocating for this. Here's another one. Melrose just recently passed an override. They tried in June of 2024 for 7 million. If you ask them, why they think they failed, they'll probably tell you that it was a rushed attempt, that they didn't have enough time. They decided late to go for the override. They didn't have enough time to publicize and get the facts out there. So they regrouped. They have yesformelrose.org. They had information on the city's website about the override impact, and they were able to get, you'll see about the no votes are about the same both times, but they were able to mobilize a lot more yes votes for the November for an easy kind of in terms of overrides. This is a big win. This is actually something, if you go to yesformelrose.org, you'll see on their website how they explained it. So this is just something I suggest. Go to everybody's website, see how they're explaining it. You might know what works for your town. But you can frame it in certain ways. Okay, this is a stabilized amount. This is a repair. This is strengthened. And they actually got the strengthened amount. But it is sometimes worrisome if you're going to go for the tiered approach. Sometimes you'll think, people are going to automatically just choose the lowest one. But it, I think, depends a lot on your town, how much campaigning you can do. This is just a slide from Grafton. I was around for the 2020 Grafton override. But Grafton, uh, like I said earlier, you can go out just for the schools. You can go out where some money goes to the school, some go to the town. The first override in 2014, there was money that went to redo roads. So, like, everybody in town benefits from nicer roads. So um, sometimes your sales pitch is improved, and especially getting the town on board is improved if they're going to get money. Other departments are getting money. Um, this is just a slide from the Boston Globe from a recent article, just a history of the last 10 years of overrides. You'll see there's been a lot more overrides in the last couple of years. 2023 was a good year for overrides. You can see more wins than losses, but 2024 wasn't as good. It's about split in 25. So this QR code right here, if you want to snap that with your phone, it goes to a Google Drive that has all of these links in it, as well as this presentation. I'm just going to click on a couple things to show you. This is the handout that we had at town meeting, just one page front and back. So there was room for four things for us. And we decided to do it in the form of questions, like a Q&A. I think that works well for the mindset of people. They usually come in with questions, why is this happening? And you try to give them the answer. So we had our slide that, we talked to you guys about. That was a consistent slide for us. We talked about acknowledging declining enrollment, and we have been reducing the core teachers. Which is directly related to total enrollment. But then we said, we've needed more supports for high need students. And then we gave a history of kind of how this has played out and where we're at with the override amount. So yeah, you can either click on the link on the slides when you get the slides, or just go to this QR code. In this QR code, there's a bunch of some other presentations that that I've done in the past, other presentations from other towns. There's a document with links to other towns' websites on how they went about the overrides. Um, and sorry, so we do definitely have time for questions. If people want to either unmute and ask questions or throw questions in the chat. Um, I got one question here. Can you talk about your multi-year assumption strategy, healthcare, state contributions? Um, so yeah, I think this is about what assumptions do we make when we're kind of trying to project out our multi-year budgets and our needs. Um, It'll be different for different districts. So if you're regional school, for example, your healthcare is in your budget. For us in towns, often the town has healthcare in their budget. So I mentioned earlier, Acton Boxborough had to go out for an override because they had a huge increase in their insurance, and that's something inside their budget. So they have to take action to deal with that. Um, it's not a direct impact to us if insurance were to skyrocket, but it would affect us. The town would have less money to give to the schools, but um, we didn't take into account health insurance. But if you are affected directly by that, I would definitely need to put some assumptions in there. We assumed for Chapter 70 that some assumptions that you'll have to make when you're doing multi-year projections, and we assumed we'd be get minimum aid. Uh, some a lot I think it's 85% of towns now are getting minimum aid, so it's a pretty good estimate to just assume minimum aid unless you know you're one of the towns that does get more uh, for expenses. I when I'm doing multi-year projections, we just kind of figure out a trend for our increases in personnel and expenses and kind of run out that trend, and then we have an assumption for town appropriation. Uh, we in Hudson get around 2.5% increase from the town every year. I think that's on the lower end, but to do multi-year projections, try to show that why you need an override, you need to estimate out your revenue and expenses to show the budget gap. Um, when you see these slides, yeah, so we had 2,283 yeses to 2,147 no's, so it's pretty close. This is one of the signs that we had, the yard signs. Um, so definitely kind of maybe try to find out what other towns did for yard signs, but this might not have been the best one. It might have been, I mean, it worked for us, but also I got some bonus slides from Belchertown at the end of this slide deck. They had a very quick override. It did pass, and they started pretty late in the game, so it is possible to start pretty late and still get a past override. Grafton's first override, I think, was started in like February or March. So it's definitely, like we said in our timeline, we didn't publicize, like really go out until March publicly about our override because we didn't want to lose steam, like if you go out too early. So, but preparation is uh, is key so that when you do go out, you have that like that unified message, the consistent message that you can give. So Grafton, was it 5 million you guys going for, Laura? Um,
Yep, 5 million, 5 years.
yeah, and I
Yep, and this
think
is our third one that we're doing.
Arlington
5 years.
just passed a couple days ago. I don't know if anybody saw that, but 14.8 million. They are a certain type of town that does continuously go out for overrides. Um, and I think they've kind of definitely have the culture of the town realizing that that's their plan. Like they have a whole, like it's not it's like a permanent plan that they know they're going to need overrides, and they explain that. So I think the town's accustomed to it. Um, if it's your first time going for override, it's a bigger hurdle to explain overrides to people. Um, but also, if you're going to go out for a second override or a third override, people might be willing to do it once. They might be willing to do it twice. I don't know. But at some point, people are going to ask, like, when is this going to end? The problem is a lot of times with Prop 2.5, like, if the town can, if the town's only increasing 2.5 to 3.5% a year, and your salaries and expenses are increasing by more than that, it's really tough. So I would suggest trying to just make the overall case like that. And this is one thing we tried to do. Say it's not mismanagement of the budget. It's just a structural thing where taxes only increase by a certain amount and expenses and salaries increase by a certain amount. So it is a thing that I think every town needs to go through at some point. Um, we got a question about how the override system is working well or what its limitations are. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think like we were trying to say, it's not a mismanagement thing. I think the in the 2.5 number, I don't think it was a like super scientific number that why Prop 2.5 was not like why wasn't it Prop 3.5. Um, but I think they wanted a trigger point where hey, if you want more than this, then we need buy-in from the town residents. So um, that's the kind of message that we tried to say that this isn't a sign of mismanagement. This is just a sign like we've come to the point where we need to ask you, uh, the residents, for an increase. If anybody wants to see any other slides, I'll just go back to kind of our timeline. Any other questions in the chat? I'll scroll back to see if I missed any questions earlier. But generally, there's some questions about, who can do what, but you can have yard signs yourself, your school committee member, the superintendent. You're allowed to campaign for the override, in your non-work hours. You don't lose the right to be an active, voter, and, um, just because just as long as you're not using town and school resources to do those things. Yeah, if anybody else on the call is in the middle of an override campaign, if you'd like to share how you guys are approaching it, that'd be great. I always like to get as much feedback from as many towns as possible.
I just want to apologize for stepping away. It was a problem at a school I had to talk to someone about, so sorry about that.
Actually, I'll go back to the QR code. Um, you can hit this QR code. Goes to my Google Drive for overrides. Has a bunch of links and presentations and documents. That should be helpful. But I definitely recommend Googling all the districts, especially the ones that passed their overrides recently, checking out how they went about it. Um, One of the big things you can do is decide on your website for your group. We went with Together for Hudson. A lot of people go for Yes for your town name. One override I also recommend looking at, I believe it was Braintree, had a pretty good margin of victory, a lot of buy-in from the town. So that was a good one to also model after. Yep, love to take any questions anybody has.
Um, and if there aren't questions, I know people love to get time back too.
Yep.
Dan, would you be willing, if anybody had any questions, to send you via email? I know you
Yeah.
have a big job. Brian's like, he needs to do his other
Yeah.
work, but
Yeah. Feel free to
Yeah.
email us. I didn't include contact info here, but you can look us up on the website. Somebody had their hand raised.
Yeah, it looks like somebody, GLN, has their hand up. And there's another question in the chat, Dan, too.
Okay.
Yes, hello. My name is Gwen Nabat. I'm a city councilor in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I'm wondering if anyone has had the experience. So I was referred to attend this session from a school committee member that I'm in good contact with. But we have had some challenges with communications between school committee members. And, there's been a lot of division in the community. And I'm wondering if anybody else has experienced that. In the process, or if anyone can talk about how school
Yeah.
committee, and I mean, it seems like in Hudson the school committee and certain select people worked well together. It seems like people were really like, they took it very seriously. But what we've seen in our city is like a lot of conspiracy theories, just really like a lot of um yeah, I know that I'm not the only community. I know we're not the only community that is experiencing this, because when I go
Mhm.
to MMA meetings, a lot of people are talking about this, but I just didn't know if anybody that's attending here tonight has had that kind of experience. Or in the case where I'm speaking to a room of school committee members, if you've had the experience of feeling that city councilors or select people are not all that responsive to um, the potential for overrides or things like that.
I
Thanks.
would love to answer that if I can. So we've this is my third time going through an override. So far, two have been successful, and we're hopeful this third one will also be successful. This last time has been the hardest one with our current select board. It only passed to get on the ballot by a 3-2 vote, so we don't even have full members of the select board in support of it. And we know that two of them are actively going out and not supporting it, which is going to make it harder. Um, we have been trying to just kind of work with facts, but I think in this day and age, people don't even really believe facts anymore. And I find that challenging. Um, we're hopeful to just continue to reach out to the people that maybe just don't know what's going on, focusing on our yeses and not focusing on our nos so much. And it is a challenge. The relationship between the select board and the school committee has been good some years, bad other years. Um, and this is one of the worst. I've been on for 12 years. This is one of the worst relationships we've ever seen. And just a side note, I'm actually married to one of the members on the select board. So I was hopeful that that would, help with the unification. Um, I don't recommend everybody marrying a select board or school committee member if they don't want to. But it's really challenging. It's challenging when they don't understand Prop 2.5. They don't understand what Dan said about how this isn't a spending problem, it's a funding problem. They've gone after our teachers, of course, that we should be cutting the salaries of our teachers because that's obviously one of our bigger cost drivers. You come back with facts and it's tricky. So I guess I don't know if I answered your question or you just kind of wanted to know if you weren't alone, but
Yeah,
just the fact that you're on
yeah,
this, sorry,
are
is
we
so
alone out here? I don't think that we are, but I'm so grateful for you to share that from your positionality and also like your experience of that. It's definitely helpful for me. Um, I think that Northampton wants to do the best that we can, but we also have a lot of retirees, and so and just like you guys, we have a declining student population. And of course, like we've gone from like 35% school funding that was given from the state to I think it's between 8 and 11%. So it's very, very low. And so like it's even to the point where you're like, we need you guys to like you school people to go and speak to the state. We need you guys to go testify in these hearings. We need a lot of voices from Western Mass because we're not as many. Um, And so what, instead of doing that, some people just insist that it's the mayor's fault, and they just want to point blame, and it's really, really unconstructive. It's like really unhelpful and frustrating. If you do understand a little bit of the system and you are trying to, like, get more money for the schools. So, but yeah, so thank you so much.
Even that you came to this, I think, is phenomenal. And I know your rural schools are really kind of fighting. I see hands up, so I don't want to keep talking.
Maya. Oh,
Maya,
muted.
you're on mute.
Um, Maya's on mute. We have Jen also on with a hand up. Oh, can you hear? I can't
There we go.
hear.
Thank you. Can you hear
Oh,
me now?
oh, good, good, good.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand a little bit about how the kind of the history of the override system and what people who are concerned about it think. My first when I think about an override, it's like, oh, we need this community conversation because spending is happening that is inappropriate, and so we need, or potentially inappropriate. So we need to think. And I'm very much in favor of the democratic process where people do talk and there is conversation, sharing of information. But it seems to me like the override system is set up in this way where because 2.5% is so far below inflation, uh, people think something's wrong when there's not. And they think of course, we shouldn't approve an override because we shouldn't be paying that much money in taxes when actually I sit on the school committee in the Mohawk Trail District. So right now and I have little kids in elementary school. So I'm thinking about, um, so those areas of funding are important for me. But I'm just wondering where the organizing is happening, if anyone's aware of that, and I don't know, and maybe this is just an uphill battle, but like I was just looking up some of the history, and I guess when Proposition 2.5 went into place, it was not, it was certainly not a landslide, that uh,
Yeah,
it was hard to get even that in place.
I
So,
think I have heard like, this like I showed a slide, there's so many more overrides happening in the last couple of years, like, and that has produced some conversation like about Prop 2.5. Like it does seem from what I hear, like the legislators aren't eager to take up any changes to Prop 2.5. So that kind of leaves us with having to do overrides. And one thing I was going to share, like you can focus a lot on the yes votes. You're not a lot of people you might not be able to change the minds of. The other approach I took was besides focusing on the yes votes, I tried to meet with some of the officials, select board and finance committee officials that were the no side, and just to give them information directly, not necessarily hoping to make them yes votes, just hoping to maybe not make them vocal no votes, which I think is a good strategy as well. I think Jen had a comment.
Just to echo what they have been saying, that I'm in Southampton as a school committee member, and I wouldn't say that the select board is not with us in working for the override because it's needed just basically across the town, not just for our school, because we have our elementary school, but we also go to a regional high school, so it's like a whole cluster of craziness over here. Um, but there is definitely that whole mistrust that prior overrides have been pushed through for only the school because the town won't say no to the kids. Well, now the whole town needs it, and they said no to the kids last year when they did it and put it on the backs of the elementary school, and we lost 9 full-time positions at our, school. And so I understand what they're saying in Northampton, that there is a lot of distrust and it's a lot of, well, the money's been mismanaged, so why am I going to give you more money now to then mismanage? And yes, it'll go to whatever it's supposed to go to this year, but next year it'll go to whatever you want and you'll just fund other things and we'll be in the same position. So it's a definite uphill battle.
Yeah, and I think getting out early can help. We try to get as much positive information out in the newspaper about what's going on great in the schools. And we also try to
I,
get as
I,
much
I
information.
I
Uh,
will say it's the actual school system that has been a casualty. It's because of a lot of this vitriol that's happened in our community. Like a lot of parents have taken their kids out. They're just like, I'm out of here. And so we know what happens then. And but we do, I mean, when we went to tour the schools and everything like that, it was wonderful. It was really wonderful. And it's not every parent of every student that feels this way, but we did have some bad marks. And so, I don't think that we can ignore that. And as the parent of a child, of two children who needed special services throughout their education, so it is kind of an interest of mine as a city councilor, even though I'm not on school committee. And so, yeah, yeah. So as a former cost accountant, I'm always like, okay, the devil is in the details. Can we just get into the like under 10,000 stuff? But I think exactly as you're saying, it's like it's really just a it's just like a it's like a it's like everything's just coming up into this one moment. So and a difficult administration with cuts through DOE and things like that. So that makes it hard too.
yeah, and I think like I said, it hasn't seen a lot of legs for legislator to do something with Prop 2.5, but it could be a movement, that people
That's
take
something to
up.
think about. Yeah, thank you.
Um, and we had a comment from Liz from Arlington. Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on how you guys approach overrides or how you deal with the no naysayers.
Sure. Hi everybody. I was a little late getting on, so I missed the beginning of this, but I'm the superintendent in Arlington. We've been through many, many, many override votes, and we did just pass one this past weekend with a resounding yes, which was super reassuring. But the conspiracy theorizing will always happen every time. Doesn't matter what you do. It will be there. The I think key to Arlington's success prior to my tenure and during has been the long range plan that they have. So they do that projection out many, many years, and they're able to show what there's like a thank you. There's a formula that they use to do that projection that has a set of assumptions built into it about what the sort of costs will be based on actuals from prior years, as well as what the revenues will be. That's really helpful for messaging to both school committee and select board, and there are members of school committee and select board that sit on the group that work on that projection. And so that strategy is a huge part of the success, because from there they will land on a number to recommend to the select board. They will vote that number that is the ask, and then the school committee will vote that number, and that unified voice on it is really helpful. And it gets to be unified in part because there's a member of that committee that's sitting on the long range plan process and looking at that projection and going back and forth with the town manager on what should be included in it and what those projections look like. So that's one piece that it has been hugely helpful. We also have a campaign base that's pretty strong, so that helps too. There are people with knowledge of run the campaigns that are successful, and they pass that down to whoever's going to run the next one. And like we, from my perspective as a superintendent, did a ton of community forums. We went and visited every single PTO and opened with, it's a structural deficit. Here's what Prop 2.5 is. Here's what's going on in the state. Here's what the impact on per pupil spending is if this doesn't pass, and here are all the positions we're going to cut if it doesn't pass. So we took a very like fear-based motivator approach to this most recent one, and it worked. But we had to be really clear about this is what we're going to cut, and that was not fun. And it's easy to blame elsewhere. It's not, I would argue it is not the most effective approach. It's better if you have some cohesion, and I think that's been the successful element for Arlington. So I'm happy to share any resources or examples of that if anybody wanted to reach out after, because I know I have a lot of colleagues in a similar boat. And not only are more of them being asked for, more of them are failing in the last 2 years than did in the previous decade. So that's a scary space to be because it pulls down the per pupil spend. And there are a lot of state agencies that use that as a benchmark. And it's not a good benchmark because it's impacted by these votes. And if more of them fail, then we spend less on kids, and it makes it look like we should spend less on kids when we don't, when we can't.
Yeah, Liz, and if you wanted to email me your presentation, I can add it to this QR code. I have other towns' presentations like linked on this QR code, as well as Hudson's and general kind of Prop 2.5 best practices. But yeah, we're running up to the 1 o'clock, right, Laura?
Yeah, so I really want to thank everybody for joining us. Superintendents, city council, town council, school committee members. We were up to 60 participants at one point, which tells me how much we all really need this. And I think we should keep talking to each other and reaching out and sharing resources so we're not consistently reinventing the wheel. And just a shout out on MASC. If you didn't make it to Day on the Hill earlier this week, we did talk a lot about advocating our state legislation. Probably the Prop 2.5, I think, will be here for a while, but we need to relook at the formula. We need to get additional monies out for transportation in our rural communities, in our cities, and in our suburbs. Transportation cost chapter and I'm blanking, but there's a lot we can do, and MASC has those resources. So speak up to your representative and state senator too, because they need to be working harder than even all of us are. So continue to do that. And please use our MASC group to ask questions and we can help each other out. And I really want to thank Brian and Dan for taking their time and sharing their expertise with all of you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and good luck, everybody.
Take care, everybody.